Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to show you how to set up FlyingPress, which is hands down my favorite caching and optimization plugin out there. I used to use WP Rocket on all of my websites, which is the most popular caching plugin out there based on recommendations. But once I found FlyingPress, I have not looked back because FlyingPress is actually cheaper in the long run than WP Rocket. It has less options to configure, and so it's a lot easier to use. And I found that I got even faster speeds with FlyingPress, and they have an additional service called Flying CDN, which helps you optimize all of your images automatically for you, and so there's nothing you have to do. So let's jump in and show you how to set up FlyingPress. Hey, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jake Full, and I built a six-figure blogging business all on the side while I was working my 9-to-5 job. And I was able to quit my job and go full-time as an entrepreneur, doing what I love every single day. And I want to teach you exactly how to do the same. And so if that sounds interesting, make sure to click the link in the description below and sign up for my free 30-minute blogging masterclass. It's an entire overview of blogging and affiliate marketing and how easy it is to get your own website started, create a brand online, and start generating passive income every single month. Because I have built entire website templates in a box that you can import in less than 1 minute. And then I also have over 400 individual website templates that you can mix and match however you would like to create pages and blog posts 10 times faster than anybody else out there. And so make sure to click that link in the description below and get signed up for the free training. And let's get back to the video. So here I am on the FlyingPress website. You can look up FlyingPress. Otherwise, if you would like to use my affiliate link, you can go to startblogging101.com/FlyingPress. And so I'm just going to click in here and enter. And so here on the main FlyingPress homepage, if I scroll down here, they do go over some of the reasons why you should choose FlyingPress. And so many of these I had mentioned in the intro of the video that it is very, very easy to use. In fact, I would say this is one of the easiest caching plugins that I have ever used out there. There are even fewer settings to configure versus other plugins out there, such as WP Rocket, like I mentioned. I got even faster speeds, which helped me consistently pass Core Web Vitals on my websites, especially on the mobile tab, which is the only tab that you should really be focusing on. And they do have absolutely fantastic support, and it's very compatible with all of the tools that I recommend, such as the Cadence theme and all of the other plugins that we're using on our website. So if I scroll back up to the top here and we go into the features page, you can see that they have a ton of different optimization features and caching features for your website that is going to drastically speed it up. And especially when you pair this with really fast hosting, it makes it so much easier to pass Core Web Vitals. And then all of your blog posts and things like that are going to get a Google ranking boost. And that could give you hundreds, if not thousands, of additional visitors on your website, even if you bump just one place up in the rankings on Google. And so before we get started with FlyingPress, I'm here on Google PageSpeed Insights, and the URL for that is pagespeed.web.dev. And I'm gonna plug in my website in here, and we can do a quick comparison for a before and after. But I will let you know that currently, even without the FlyingPress plugin, because I'm on Rocket.net hosting and we're using a really lightweight theme such as the Cadence theme, we are already going to have really fast speeds. So I'm going to enter in ethanblackwell.com. It is https://yourdomain.com, and make sure to put a trailing slash after that. And I'm going to click analyze here. All right, so it's going to go and analyze your website here. And this very first option says discover what your real users are experiencing. And you can see that it says no data. And you probably won't see anything in here for quite some time until you start getting a decent amount of traffic and Google can actually give you real data on what other users are experiencing on your website. But then this second option here that says diagnose performance issues, this is kind of a lab type of test where it runs your website through here and gives you rough numbers of what users should be experiencing on your website. And you can see that it came back here, and we are on the mobile tab here, which is the most important tab that you should be optimizing your website for, because Google uses what is called mobile first indexing, where when it goes and indexes your pages and your blog posts and things like that, it's looking at the mobile page first because that is where the vast majority of traffic comes from. And the mobile tab also happens to be the hardest tab for people to optimize for. And so many times when you see people are using third-party page builders such as Elementor or something like that, they might have a really good score on desktop here, but then when they go to the mobile tab, they have a really, really poor score. And just because you have a good desktop score doesn't really mean anything, because you need a good score on the mobile tab. So the results came back here, and this is just amazing. We have a performance score of 96 overall. And now when you hover over this is really cool. There's a new feature that now shows where you're getting those values from. So FCP is your first contentful paint. LCP is your largest contentful paint. CLS is your cumulative layout shift. TBT is your total blocking time. And so it'll tell you more about that in the numbers down here. And here is just a quick screenshot of what Google saw when it went to our website. And again, I know we don't have real content on our website yet. We don't really have any of our real pictures or things like that, but we do have entire pre-built pages out there since we're using the Discover theme in this scenario. And so these numbers are just absolutely amazing. And if I scroll down a little bit more here, here is that first contentful paint at 1.3 seconds. The largest contentful paint is 2.4 seconds. We have a total blocking time of 140 milliseconds and 0 cumulative layout shift. And so these are amazing numbers because we don't even have a caching or optimization plugin on our website right now. And so that just goes to show how important it is to have really fast hosting and be using a lightweight theme such as the Cadence theme. And we're also not using any bloated third-party page builders such as Elementor or anything like that. And then if we scroll down even more here, Google Page Speed Insights does give you some diagnostics and tells you some things that you can improve. And so you can see it says reduce unused JavaScript, and you can click in here. And that's actually from Google Analytics in here. And then it says eliminate render blocking resources, and it gives a little bit of information about that. But these things should be cleared up when we use a caching plugin such as FlyingPress. So I'm gonna scroll back up here, and I'm actually gonna jump to the desktop tab. And we already have a 100 on performance for the desktop tab. And again, we have not even added a caching / optimization plugin on our website. So let's jump back to the home page here. And I'm gonna click on the big button here that says Get FlyingPress. All right, so this brings us to the pricing page. And if I scroll down here, since you are most likely only going to be focusing on one main website for now, I would highly recommend just using the personal plan here, which you can see is for one website. And so FlyingPress is $60 for the first year, but then it is only $42 per year after that. And that is the same for all of their plans here. And so here I am on the WP Rocket pricing page just to show you a quick comparison. And although these prices might be different at the time of watching this video, right now WP Rocket is $59 per year, but they do not give you a discount on additional renewal years. And as you can see, that's for one website here. And then their plus plan is for 3 websites at $120 per year. And so if we just jump back to FlyingPress here, you can see that after the first year, it's only $42 a year for one website, and it's $105 per year after your first year for the developer plan, which is 5 websites. So in the long run, FlyingPress is noticeably cheaper than WP Rocket, and it's even better. So we're gonna go with the personal plan here. So I'm gonna click Buy Now. And so here is a really clean checkout page. You will enter in your name and your address, and then your billing information. And then you can see on the right-hand side here that it is a subscription for only $42 every year. And it's just applying that additional $18 for the first year. But then after that, it'll be only $42. And I think for that price, for what you get with this plugin, it is well worth it because you don't need to worry about anything basically on your website and trying to figure out the speed and spending hours and hours trying to tweak and configure your website. So just fill in all your information here, and then I'm gonna scroll down. And once you're done, you'll click the purchase button here. All right, so once you purchase your FlyingPress plan, you should get a couple of emails that will give you some more information. Otherwise, you can log into the FlyingPress page just like we were on and go to the account tab here. And you can see that I'm actually currently on the developer plan, but let's go in and get your download. So in the dashboard here under downloads, I'm gonna click on my plan right here. And here is where you will get your download for the FlyingPress plugin. So you'll click the download button here. And then you can also see right here, which I'll have blurred out, is your license key that you will use to activate it. And you'll also see the number of activations that you have for your websites. So I'm going to click the download button here to download the plugin. All right, so that downloaded that. And now let's jump over to our website to get this installed. All right, so here we are on the WordPress dashboard of Ethan's website. And I'm going to jump over to plugins here. And then at the top here, I'm going to click add new plugin. And then you'll see a button at the top here that says upload plugin, since we now have the zip file from FlyingPress. So I'm going to click on that. And here's a little file chooser. So I'm going to choose that zip file that we just downloaded from the FlyingPress account. All right, awesome. So I've chosen the FlyingPress zip file here, and I'm going to click install now. All right, so that was successfully installed. And so now I'm just going to click activate plugin. Okay, so you can see that FlyingPress is now activated on our website, but you will see an alert up here that says your license key is not activated. Please activate your license key. So I'm going to click on the activate button here. And so it brings you to the FlyingPress screen here, and we are on the settings tab. And there is an option here to activate your license. And so you'll go and copy the license from your FlyingPress account and enter it in here, and then click activate license. All right, awesome. So FlyingPress is now successfully activated on our website. And one thing that I want to point out here is there is a really nice export and import configuration that they have in the settings tab here. And so if you don't want to go through all of these settings and set them up manually, and you don't really care what each of them does, you can import my file that I will have in the description below. And since you're following this course and installing many of the same plugins and things that I have on my website, it should be a very, very good baseline to get you started, and should just work right off the bat. And so if you grab that file from the description, you'll come into the settings tab and you'll click import here, and you'll choose that file, and then it will go and automatically update all of your settings for you to match what I have. And then one more thing to keep in mind is that different settings and things are always changing in these plugins. And so it might be kind of tough to keep the video up to date in case something does change in the settings. But in general, the settings should more or less be the same. And then some of the imported settings that you get from that file may differ slightly from this video, but it's not a big deal. All right, so let's go through each of these tabs and get your website set up for the best FlyingPress settings to improve the speed on your website. So I'm first gonna go to the dashboard tab at the top here. So this dashboard tab is pretty self-explanatory. It tells you the number of pages that are cached. It says that our license is valid since we just activated it. And then there are a few options here if you want to delete the cached HTML pages, if you want to preload your cache, if you want to purge the pages and preload your cache, or if you want to purge everything and preload. And since you aren't always going to be on the dashboard page, there are these same quick actions in the admin bar at the top here. So if you hover over FlyingPress, you'll see these same options here. So a lot of times if I go in and I'm changing something on my website, say I'm adding a cadence element that gets dynamically added to several different pages, I'll usually come up to the FlyingPress tab here, and I will just purge everything and preload. And what that does is just clears out the whole cache and starts preloading your pages so that the next person that visits your website will still have a very fast experience. All right, and then also from the dashboard tab here, you can see that there is a quick link to the documentation, which is very good and goes through all of these different settings if you want to learn more. There's a dedicated Facebook community that you can join to get help and connect with other people. And then there's also an option to contact support if you need to. All right, so that's everything for the dashboard tab. Let's now jump to the cache option. All right, so in the cache tab here, FlyingPress actually automatically caches all your pages. And so even if you have another layer of caching, say at the server level, which I know is technical, FlyingPress is automatically going to still cache your pages, which acts as a fallback in case you need it. And so that's actually really nice. And that's just one example of fewer settings that you need to configure in this caching plugin compared to other plugins out there. And so in the cache settings here, the first option is the cache logged in users. And I would recommend having this disabled because we're not gonna have users logging in and logging out of our website. This option to automatically preload the cache, I would leave this enabled, and so that will automatically go and preload the cache after you save settings and do other relevant things on your website that would cause a need for this. And then the preload links on hover, I would also keep this enabled. And so what that does is if a user is reading through a blog post, for example, and they hover over a link and say that link is an internal link to another page on your website, as soon as they start hovering on that link, it's going to start loading that page. And then if they click on it, it's just going to instantly switch over to that page. And so this really helps with the speed of switching pages and even just the perceived speed in going throughout your website. For the scheduled preload, I would recommend leaving this as never. You shouldn't need to use any of these options unless you start running into some issues, which I'm not going to get into here, but having it set to never is going to save on server resources, and that should work for the vast majority of websites. So with all these cache settings, I'm going to click Save Changes. All right, now let's jump over to the CSS tab here. All right, so in the CSS tab here, I would recommend having the Minify CSS option enabled. And so what this does is in all of your CSS files, it's going to remove things such as the white spaces and comments. And what that does is it helps just condense those CSS files and not use as many characters. So that's going to reduce your file size and help them load faster. And then I would also recommend enabling the remove unused CSS. And so what this will do is it will intelligently go through and try to figure out what CSS is being unused on your pages and automatically remove that from the initial loading of your page so that your page loads really fast at first. And then any of that CSS that it determines it does not need right off the bat, it will go and you can choose which option you want to do. And so I'd recommend choosing asynchronously. And so what that means is it's only going to load the necessary CSS for your initial page load. And then all of the remaining CSS that it doesn't need right away, it's going to asynchronously load that from there. Asynchronously is the safest option. You can completely remove the unused CSS. I wouldn't recommend doing that because the chances of seeing something break is probably pretty high. And then on user interaction is kind of similar in the sense that if there is some CSS that helps with the styling of the page, you might see your page kind of look weird or broken until somebody scrolls or they move their mouse. And so I would recommend just leaving this set as asynchronously. And then if you ever find that there are style sheets that you want to exclude from this, you can enter them here. I personally haven't needed to use this before, but that option is there, which is really nice. And then similarly, you can include different CSS selectors in here. If you find that there's a certain CSS class that it keeps removing and it shouldn't be, you can actually enter those in here. But again, I have not needed to use this. And then I do just want to touch on the lazy render elements feature because this is absolutely amazing and one of the things that sets FlyingPress apart from other caching plugins out there. And so what you can do is you can actually enter CSS selectors and lazy render certain elements on your page until the user gets close to scrolling that element into their viewport. And so you may have heard about lazy rendering images, and what that means is that all of the images are not loaded until the user scrolls and gets close to loading that image in a blog post, for example. But what this does is it's actually lazy rendering entire elements. And so you can go in and specify a CSS selector in here and lazy load elements, which will help improve your page speed even more. So I'm going to plug a few in here that I personally use, and then I'll show you how you can use this if you want to go further with it. All right, so I have pasted 3 different CSS selectors in here. And so I have entry dash related, and that starts with a period. And what that means is we're just targeting a CSS class. And then the second one here is a pound sign and then comments. And then what that is a CSS ID. And then the third option I have here is just the word footer, and that is just an HTML element. And so if you don't understand what that means, that's okay. You can still plug these in here and you should be good. But I do want to jump in and show you where I'm getting these values from. All right, so here I am on a sample blog post on Ethan Blackwell's website. And if we scroll down here, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. Here is where we have these similar posts that show. And we don't actually need to render this until the user comes close to scrolling this into their viewport. So as they're scrolling down the blog post here, then we'd want to render it and then it would show up here. And so this is a good example for something that you can use for lazy rendering elements. So if you want to target this element in FlyingPress, you can right click here and I'm going to click inspect. And so here we are inspecting it, and I'm actually going to jump to this top level div here, and it's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to zoom in here. But you can see that as I hover over this, this is the entire element here, and it shows the different classes here. And the first class is entry dash related. And so that is where I got the element from. And since this is a CSS class, you can then come in and plug it into FlyingPress here. And it's a CSS class, so that's why I put a period before it. So we're targeting that entry dash related class. and back on Ethan's website, that is going to target this entire element and lazy render it. And then similarly, as we scroll down here, if there's different comments that are being left, we don't need to render those until the user scrolls those into their viewport. And so I'm gonna right click and inspect here. And here you can see that there is a ID that equals comments. And if we click on that, that is going to be your whole comment area here. And since this is an ID and not a class, we actually target it differently. So you can double click on comments here. You could go into your FlyingPress here, and an ID is specified through a # here. And so that's why I have the # and then comments. And then back on Ethan's website, if we scroll down, our whole footer here as well. So I'm going to right click and inspect by the footer. Here you can see that the entire HTML element is just called footer. And so if you just have an HTML element, you can simply just write the name in here. And so as I hover over there, that is our entire footer, and we're going to lazy render that as well. So back in FlyingPress here, that is why I wrote the word footer. So I know that that's a little bit technical, but some of you may understand that. And so I just wanted to show you how I'm getting these values in here and how you can use this lazy render elements feature in FlyingPress, because it is so awesome and is one of those features that puts FlyingPress ahead of all the competition. All right, so with all of these options set and the lazy render elements specified in here, I'm gonna click Save Changes. So now let's jump over to the JavaScript tab here. So here on the JavaScript tab, I would recommend having the minify JavaScript option enabled. And this is the same exact thing as the CSS one, where it is going to take all of your JavaScript files and remove things such as white spaces and comments to reduce that character count and make these files even smaller so they load faster. And then for this second option here, we are going to enable the defer JavaScript option. So what this defer JavaScript option does is it should help address the eliminate render blocking resources suggestion in Google Page Speed Insights for your JavaScript files. And it should help with different things such as your first input delay and your total blocking time. And then I would also enable the defer inline option here. And I should note that with any of these options, if you go and change something here and save the changes, I would always recommend going into your website, clicking around a few pages and making sure that everything still looks correct. Because even though many of these caching plugins are very compatible with other themes and things, there's always a chance that something might slightly break. And so you could always come in and turn off that option. Otherwise, that is why there are features such as this that says exclude scripts from defer. And so if something was breaking after this and there was a certain script that you wanted to add into here that doesn't get deferred, you could always come in and add it here. And so a good example of that is that every once in a while, I would see that the search functionality would take a couple of clicks on my website or something similar to that. And so what I'm actually gonna do is I'm just gonna paste the word cadence config in here with a capital C right there. And so I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail on this, but that is a certain JavaScript file here that we are going to exclude from getting deferred just to make sure that everything works on our Cadence website. And so with that said in there, we are also going to enable the delay JavaScript here. And so I'm gonna click on that. And so this is really nice because there is a whole list here, and I can actually expand this out. And they have a whole list here of common scripts that are used on many websites, with the most popular ones being things such as Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager. And so I would recommend choosing the delay selected option, which is just going to delay these scripts here. And you can always add to this list if you would like. And what this is going to do is it's going to wait for user interaction until it runs these scripts. So once someone loads your page and then they start moving their mouse or they scroll or they click, then it will go and start loading those scripts. And so that's going to drastically help a lot of your Core Web Vitals scores. And so everything should be good there. So I'm going to collapse this back up here. And with all of these options chosen, I'm going to click Save Changes. All right, so now let's jump over to the Fonts tab here. All right, so in the font settings here, the very first option is to optimize Google Fonts. And what that is going to do is it's going to combine and self-host Google Fonts on your server to help improve speed. And so I will mention this in other videos a few times, but if you are using Google Fonts on your website, you should be self-hosting those Google Fonts on your local server to help improve speed, and it is more compliant for GDPR if that applies to you. But I do want to mention that there are two different ways to locally host Google Fonts on your website. So one of the options is through a caching plugin such as FlyingPress, which is this option that we have right here. But then another option is in the Cadence Customizer. So I'm going to jump over to there. And here we are in the Cadence Customizer. And if we go to the General tab, and at the very bottom, there is an option for performance. So I'm going to click on that. You will see that there is a toggle that says load Google Fonts locally. And so this option is also baked into the Cadence theme. And so again, if you were using Google Fonts on your website, I would locally host your Google Fonts, but I would not recommend doing it in both locations because they're both doing the same thing and it might cause some issues. So if it's easier for you to just use it in the caching plugin, you're more than welcome to just do it here. I am personally using system fonts on my website, which is the fastest way to load fonts because there's zero load that needs to happen in the browser. And so this option actually doesn't even do anything for me if you are using system fonts, but I think that you are fine to leave this option enabled regardless. And then I would recommend having the display fallback fonts option enabled as well. And so if you're using Google Fonts, what this will do is it will load a web type of font first on your website so that you see that text instantly, and then you might see it just really quickly switch over to show your Google font. And that just helps with different things in Core Web Vitals to make sure that the text is loading immediately on your page, and then it will go and switch over to a Google font if you're using that. And then if you have a URL for your Google font, you can plug it in here to preload those fonts for you. And then similarly in the Cadence Customizer, if I jump back to there, if you were using Google Fonts and you wanted to locally host them through the Cadence theme instead, you would click this option and you can see there's another toggle here to preload the local fonts automatically, and you actually don't need to enter in any URL or anything like that. And so this option is obviously very easy to use if you would like. And so back here in the font settings in FlyingPress, I'm gonna leave these two options enabled and leave this blank and click Save Changes. All right, so now let's jump over to the Images tab here. All right, so in the Images tab, I would recommend having the Lazy Load Images option enabled. And so similarly to the Lazy Load Elements option that I showed you in the CSS tab, this is going to lazy load all of your images. And so this is a really, really nice feature. In fact, when I am writing blog posts, especially tutorials, I will have dozens of images on my blog posts. I sometimes have 40 or 50 images in those blog posts. And if you had to load all of those from the onset, your page would be very, very slow. And so what this is going to do is it's going to automatically lazy load those images, and then they are only going to load once the user gets close to scrolling that image into their viewport. And so here is an example post that I'm just gonna show you, and this is a whole post that I wrote on the best FlyingPress settings to pass Core Web Vitals, which is a written tutorial that I made. And so as we scroll down here, each of these images that I have, and I have tons and tons of different images that load here, they're all going to be lazy loaded, and they're only going to load as soon as the user gets close to scrolling these images into their viewport. And then this is another really nice feature in FlyingPress, and this is to exclude above the fold images, and you can choose how many images you want. And so it defaults to 2, but I am just going to change it to 3 just to be safe. And I'll show you what this means. So back here in my blog post, say someone clicks on this from Google or they go to it from my website and it goes and initially loads this page. If you look at this right now, you can see that most of what you see is just text, and there's a reason for that. And that's because what you see above the fold, and what that means is everything that loads before the user goes to scroll here, this is what largely determines things such as your largest contentful paint in Google's Core Web Vitals. And so if you can get this to load mostly text and not have these super heavy images right off the bat, it's going to drastically improve the load speed for your blog posts. And so many times what you see is people will have a featured image at the very top here. And if you were lazy loading that image that shows at the top here, that's actually going to slow down the rendering of your page, because even that image at the very top is being lazy loaded. And if there are images at the top above the fold here, you do not want to lazy load them because you want them to load as quickly as possible for the initial page load. And so I jump back to our FlyingPress settings here. This is where you can determine how many images you want to exclude from being lazy loaded to make sure that they render as fast as possible. And then all of the images after that are going to be lazy loaded. So let's jump back to our blog post here really quick. So things such as our logo here, and I'm actually not positive, I'd have to look into this, but my little Gravatar image here might be included in that. And so even with just 2 chosen with this current layout, that would be more than fine. But if you want to just play it safe, you could choose 3. Otherwise, just leave it defaulted to 2. And so what that would do is this featured image down here, which I purposely put below the fold, it would also not lazy load this image. But I usually try to optimize this image to be as small as possible. And so even if this is not lazy loaded, that is more than fine. And then if you want to exclude certain images from being lazy loaded, you can enter those into this box here. This option here that says to add responsive images using Flying CDN, this is really, really nice and will automatically create responsive images for you. But that is using Flying CDN, which is another service connected to FlyingPress here, which I will cover in another video. And then I would recommend enabling the add missing width and height option here. And so sometimes you might have images that don't have a specific width or height specified in the code. And so what this will do is it will go and try to figure that out and add them automatically for you, which is just another one of those options in Google Page Speed Insights that you might end up seeing sometimes. And then this option will host your Gravatar images locally on your server. And so going back to my blog post example here, this little image, rather than going and making an external call to the Gravatar servers, which is just some unnecessary time that doesn't need to happen, it will go and locally host this little image on your server so that it doesn't need to make an external request and help speed up the loading of that image. And so back here in FlyingPress, this is another one of those features that is actually baked into the Pro version of the Cadence theme if you would prefer to use it there. And so I do just want to show you that. So if you go to Appearance and then Cadence here, if you have the Cadence Pro theme enabled on your website, you have these options for the Pro add-ons. And we went in an earlier video and enabled the option for local Gravatars. And you can see that it says loads Gravatars from your servers to improve site performance. So this again is another one of those features that is the same as FlyingPress. And since I already have it enabled in Cadence Theme Pro, I'm gonna leave it enabled here, but you might not have Cadence Theme Pro. And so in the FlyingPress settings here, I'm going to enable this. So I'd recommend having this enabled in only one location. So if you have Cadence Theme Pro and you wanna enable it there, you can. Otherwise, if you're only using FlyingPress, but you're not using Cadence Theme Pro, then I would enable it here. But I'm just gonna leave it enabled for this tutorial. And then I would recommend having the option to preload critical images enabled. And so what this will do is it will go and preload images that it deems are critical, such as your logo and featured images and other images above the fold. All right, so I'm gonna come down and click Save Changes. And now let's jump over to the iFrames tab here. All right, so for these iFrame settings here, I would recommend enabling the lazy load iframes. And so where you might be using iframes is usually when you embed something. So if you're embedding a tweet, or if you're embedding a YouTube video or a Google map or a Spotify playlist or something like that on your website, what this is going to do is it's going to lazy load those iframes, because those can drastically slow down your page speed, especially if they're loading from the onset. So I'd recommend having lazy load iframes enabled. And then we're also going to enable the use placeholder images for YouTube videos. And so if you do go and embed a YouTube video on your website, what this will do is it will actually replace that YouTube iframe with a simple placeholder image, which requires significantly less loading than loading that whole iframe. And then once they click the play button or something like that, then it will go and do all the heavy lifting to load that iframe. So these options are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm gonna click Save Changes. All right, so then let's quickly jump over to the CDN tab here, which I'll explain. So this is Flying CDN, which is an additional service that goes hand in hand with FlyingPress. It is completely optional, but at $3 a month, this is one of the most underrated services that I have run into in WordPress. Because what Flying CDN does is it will automatically do image compression and convert your images to WebP, which is an even smaller file. It has adaptive image delivery, and so that goes into the responsive images that I was talking about in the Images tab before. And then since it's using a CDN, which is a content delivery network, there are 114 edge locations all throughout the world that your images are being stored on. And so this is especially helpful if you have a global audience. And if someone who lives in a completely different country from where your server is located goes to access your website, it will actually be loading your images from the server that is closest to them rather than your origin server. And so this is just a really, really fast way to load images. It takes care of all the compression for you. And this alone has saved me hundreds of hours from needing to go and manually compress images or deal with other compression plugins on WordPress. And so I'm not going to go through how to set up Flying CDN in this video. I will cover that in a different video, but just know that this tab is where we will be setting it up. All right, so let's jump over to the bloat option now. All right, so here in the bloat settings, there are a ton of different options of things that you can disable on your website. But just to let you know, you absolutely should not go through and click all of these because some of these might break certain things on your website depending on what you're using. And so let's go through each of these a little more in detail. So the very first option here says to remove Google Fonts. And obviously, if you are using Google Fonts on your website, you definitely do not want to enable this feature. I am personally using system fonts on my website, so I suppose that I could have this enabled, but just for the sake of this tutorial, I'm gonna leave this disabled. We are going to enable the second option here. So this is something that causes unnecessary requests and can actually be a security concern on your website. It's an older protocol that was used, and so I would recommend disabling this. The third option here is to disable RSS feed, and since you have a blog on your website, I would highly recommend not disabling the RSS feed so that other people can tap into that to see updates if they would like. And then the fourth option here is to disable the block editor CSS, but we are using the block editor. In fact, that's all we're using is the built-in WordPress block editor for all of our posts and pages. So I definitely recommend not enabling this option because you don't want it to mess with any of the CSS or styling with the block editor. This option here to disable O embeds, this depends on who you ask on whether you should enable this or not. I'm personally going to enable it, and what it does is it allows other sites to embed different blog posts and things on their websites, but it's something that I haven't really used. And honestly, this file is so small that it shouldn't really matter either way whether you disable it or not, but I always usually disable O embeds on my websites. The option here to disable emojis, I am going to enable this, and I know that might sound scary that we are disabling emojis, but what this is doing is removing an additional file that WordPress uses to show emojis on different websites, but your browser is still going to interpret emojis just fine using Unicode. And so if you're in a blog post and you type a colon and then a right parentheses, for example, for a smiley face, it's still gonna render that as a smiley face. Or if you go in and you just add an emoji through your keyboard like you would normally do, your browser is still gonna recognize that emoji and show it. And so all this option is doing is getting rid of the additional file that WordPress uses to show emojis, and you don't need it. The option here to disable WP cron, we are going to leave this disabled. And so if you have your own external cron that you were using through your web hosting provider, for example, then you would come in here and disable the default one. But if you don't have something like that set up, and if you're just starting out, you won't have that, then I would recommend just leaving this disabled. And then we will come and enable the option here to disable jQuery migrate. And so many plugins have been trying to get away from using jQuery and just use vanilla JavaScript, which is a lot lighter than using jQuery. And jQuery migrate was used to provide backwards compatibility for older jQuery code. And this has been getting phased out in WordPress anyway. So I would recommend disabling this. The next option is to disable dash icons. And so I am going to enable this. And so dash icons are the icons that are used in the back end of your website. But what this option does is it removes that file from the front end, which doesn't need to load on your website. And so that's why I would recommend having that enabled. And then for control post revisions, I am going to enable this. And so when you are creating a page or a blog post, what WordPress is doing in the background is auto-saving different drafts of that file. And I find that many times I might want to go back to a previous version that I had. Perhaps I want to revert some of the changes that I made, or there's something that I added that I end up deciding that I don't want. That's when I can go in and use those post revisions to revert that file. And so I would recommend controlling the post revisions through FlyingPress here. The default option is to completely disable revisions, but I would not recommend having this chosen because then you won't have any revisions at all. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change it to 10. And then what that will allow is that there will then be 10 revisions saved that you can then revert back to if you want, but it's not gonna save hundreds of different revisions and bog down your database. And then for the control heartbeat, I'm gonna enable this as well. And so what this is there's a heartbeat API that is constantly running calls in the background. And so especially if you're on something like shared hosting, this can really use a lot of CPU usage and bog down your resources. So what this will do is help you control that heartbeat API and reduce those number of calls, which will really help. And so I would recommend changing this to enable only while editing posts. I think that is the only time that you really want the heartbeat running. And then you can see that it defaults to 15 seconds, but we're actually gonna bump that down to 60 seconds. So now when you're only editing posts, it's only gonna run that call once a minute. And so that's gonna drastically cut down the number of calls that are happening in the back end. All right, so that is everything for the bloat settings. I am gonna come down here and click Save Changes. And now let's jump over to the database tab. All right, so in the database settings here, the very first option says automatic cleaning. So you can choose if you want this to automatically clean your database on certain intervals. So it defaults to never because all of these options are off, but I would recommend setting this to weekly so that each week it's going and automatically optimizing your database. And then let's go through each of the options here. So the first two options, I would recommend leaving these disabled. So you don't want to completely clear out post revisions or post auto drafts. Because as I mentioned before in the bloat settings, these are things that I many times go back to and might revert to a certain revision that I had on a blog post. And so I don't want these to be completely wiped out. So I'm gonna leave these disabled, but then all of the rest of these I'm going to enable. So I'm gonna enable all these here. And so trash posts, those are posts that you've gone and deleted and are just sitting in your trash. So it's gonna automatically clean those out. Spam comments, you obviously don't want those, so it's going to clean those out for you. And also trash comments, which are comments that you have manually deleted yourself. And then expired transients and all transients, you don't need those, so just get rid of them. And then it's going to automatically optimize your tables for you as well. So I would recommend leaving this as weekly, have the first two options for post revisions and post auto drafts disabled, and then all the rest of these enabled, and then click Save Changes. And then we'll just really quickly jump over to the Advanced tab here. And so here are some advanced settings that you are very unlikely to use, but they're there if you need them. And so you can exclude certain pages from caching by plugging in the URL or path of pages in here. You can ignore query parameters, and I'm not going to get into that. They have a lot more in the documentation about that. You can include query parameters, and then you can also bypass certain cookies. And so it's very unlikely that you will use these, but the options are there and tucked away in a nice advanced tab if you would like. All right, so that's everything for our FlyingPress settings, and we've gone and saved everything. So let's go visit our website, and I'm just gonna click around and make sure that things look good. So here I am on the homepage of our website. Everything is looking good. As I scroll down here, all of the sections all look the same. The footer is rendering perfectly. Let's scroll back up and jump to the About page here. This loaded instantly, and everything looks good here with all of our different content boxes. Footer's looking good, and I'll jump back up and go to the blog page. The forms rendering, we have all of our different articles here. So that's great, and we'll jump back up to the contact page here, and this is all rendering fine as well. And then let me actually just click into the search icon. So that did load on the first click, which is really good. And let's just type sample in here and hit enter. And so here's our search results page for sample. And let's just actually jump into one of these posts. So I'm gonna go into the sample listicle post 2. That instantly loaded as well. We have our sample post 2. The sidebar is there. Everything is looking good. And yeah, I would say that we're good to go. So back here on the Google PageSpeed Insights page, I'm going to actually rerun this now that we have our FlyingPress settings configured. And we were already seeing extremely fast speeds with our fast hosting, our lightweight theme, and not using a third-party page builder. And we also don't have real content on our website yet, including any heavy images or things like that. But I still do just want to run through this and see if we improved some of those suggestions that we had from before. So I have my URL in here. Keep in mind it's yourdomain.com with a trailing slash. And then I'm going to click Analyze. And look at that. We have a perfect 100 on mobile now. If I jump over to the Desktop tab, That's still a perfect 100. So let's look at the mobile tab here. And as I mentioned when we first ran this in the beginning of the video, you kind of hover over here and see all of the different things that make up that score, which is really, really cool. And obviously we don't have any improvements to make, so it's all green. But if you had things that you needed to improve on your website, such as your largest contentful paint here, this might be yellow. And so it would help show that that is the item that you need to focus on. But let's scroll down here, and we have a first contentful paint of 1.2 seconds, a largest contentful paint of 1.5 seconds, no total blocking time now, so that's been improved, 0 cumulative layout shift, and that is awesome. And so if we scroll down here, there is still a thing that says reduce unused CSS, and you are still gonna see a few little suggestions here and there, but we got a perfect 100, and this is so minimal at 14 kilobytes that this is nothing to worry about. But if I close out of here, you will notice that a couple of other suggestions that we had in here, I showed you the Google Tag Manager thing that it was complaining about before. That has been completely removed, along with the eliminate render blocking resources that we saw. And that's because we configured all the best settings in FlyingPress, and that should take care of many of the suggestions that you see in Google Page Speed Insights. So let's scroll back up here, and it is amazing that we are starting with a perfect 100 out of 100 on both desktop and mobile, and we have full pre-designed pages already on our website. We are using the Cadence theme, Cadence blocks. We have all of our essential plugins installed on our website, and we have screaming fast scores. So this is the perfect foundation to get you started. And then as we go and start building blog posts and things like that, with all of the settings that we've set in FlyingPress, you're going to be good to go. And I'm going to continue to sprinkle different speed suggestions throughout the videos here to make sure that we keep our site speed extremely fast so that you can pass Google's Core Web Vitals and get that crucial Google ranking boost. So that is how you configure the FlyingPress caching and optimization plugin on your website. I cannot say enough good things about FlyingPress. I switched from WP Rocket to FlyingPress a couple of years ago, and I think for the money, it is an absolute no-brainer because it does so many things for you and makes your site so fast so that you can pass Google's Core Web Vitals and get that Google ranking boost. FlyingPress is so simple and straightforward, and there are a lot less settings to configure, and so that makes it just that much easier to use over other caching plugins out there. So before I had this plugin and I was using bloated third-party page builders in the past, I was spending hundreds of hours on my website trying to optimize it, increase my page speed so that I could try and pass Core Web Vitals, and I could never get there. And so FlyingPress is easily one of the best investments that I've made on my website. So I hope that this video helped, and I'll see you guys in the next one.